Good morning, my resilient friends. I am so glad that I get to talk with you more this morning about getting back up when something gets you down. See, all of us are going to face tough challenges in life, but with God's help, we can bounce back and push through. We can make it through some of the most difficult situations when we remember that God loves us and that God is always with us. Now, I know if we're honest that some days just seem harder than others. Sometimes you might feel like just going back to bed, staying there all day and pulling the covers up over your head. Maybe you just don't want to face what's out there or all the things that you have to do, or maybe you just feel like things haven't been going your way lately. And the person who wrote the book of Hebrews knew that feeling. Now, this person loved God deeply and he had studied a lot, and he knew that the best way that we can understand who God is and what he has done is by studying what he's done in the past. And the more that we know about that, the more that we know that we can trust God in the future. Now, in chapter 11, the writer talks about faith. How having faith is being sure of what we hope for, even when it's something that we can't see. Just like how we know and we trust that God loves us and is always with us, even though we can't see him with our eyes. In this same chapter in Hebrews, the writer looks back at how God has worked through history, and so that we can see how God has worked in the lives of those who have come before us. And he shows us how God has worked in people's lives through difficult times, and yet these people kept big faith. These men and women got back up even when what was in front of them may have seemed impossible. And so we can look at their stories and remember that God can work in the hard parts of our stories too. So the first person we're going to talk about is Abraham. God called Abraham to leave his comfortable home and to go somewhere new. He told Abraham to leave his country, his people, and his family, and to go to a new country. And he didn't even tell him what country that was going to be at first. He told him, though, that he would make Abraham into a great nation and that he would make him be a blessing to other people. And Abraham had faith, so he obeyed God and he went where God showed him. And then, many years later, when Abraham and his wife Sarah were very old, they still had no children, and God promised them that through them they would have more descendants than the stars in the sky. And just as God promised, the two of them had a son named Isaac, which was the beginning of the fulfillment of that promise. And then a couple of generations later, we find Joseph. He was his father's favorite son, and he had a beautiful homemade coat to prove it. And then one day he had a dream that his brothers would someday bow down to him. And he shared that dream with his brothers, which they didn't like very much. They were so angry that they sold him into slavery. Now, Joseph ended up far away in Egypt, first as a slave and then as a prisoner charged with a crime that he didn't even commit. But through all of this, Joseph made the choice to trust God and was able to bounce back. In the end, Joseph was made second in command in Egypt to the Pharaoh and was able to store up enough food to save his family and all the rest of God's people from starvation. And then a few hundred years later, God's people were still enslaved to the Egyptians, but God called Moses, who was an Israelite but had been raised as Pharaoh's grandson, to stand up and to face the Pharaoh and to demand that he free God's people. Even though Moses was scared and unsure, he chose to trust God and eventually led the Israelites out of Egypt and through the waters of the Red Sea as Pharaoh chased them. And for 40 years, Moses trusted God as he was able to lead the Israelites through the desert, facing attacks from the outside and also from the inside as the people constantly complained. But finally, Moses was able to glimpse the land that God had promised Abraham so many years before. Now, Abraham, Joseph, and Moses are just a few of the people that we read about in Hebrews that did amazing things through faith. But there's something important that we need to remember about faith. Having faith doesn't mean that everything will go perfectly for us. God doesn't promise us that. It doesn't even mean that things will go maybe how we expect they might. These three men face crazy ups and downs, but having faith in God, they learned then, and we can learn through their stories, can mean that we can bounce back from hard things because God knows the end of the story. We can have faith and trust that God will lead us in the way that we should go because He promises that in His time to make everything right and to always be with us. So guys, we have an incredible opportunity. When we choose to trust God, we continue the story of the amazing men and women that are mentioned in the book of Hebrews. Like them, we can face tough challenges with faith and live each day with resilience. So remember, trusting God can help you get back up.